Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, has an unholy alliance between the left flank of the Democratic Party and Republican leadership brought us to the brink of a government shutdown? Well, that's Joe Manchin's take on Bernie Sanders' refusal to vote for a much anticipated permitting bill, the language of which dropped just yesterday evening. Allow me to catch you up. You probably remember that Democrats passed the Inflation Reduction Act last month. It has little to nothing to do with inflation, and it does the absolute minimum in terms of cutting the kinds of gas emissions that are driving weather events, like the hurricane that just knocked out all the power in Puerto Rico. But despite that, Democrats have been crowing about how the bill is going to save the planet and, importantly, Democratic midterm chances. But Democrats were only able to secure all 50 Democratic votes by sweetening the deal for West Virginia's Joe Manchin. Remember, it was Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema who have been holding up much of Biden's agenda for 2 years now. It was Joe Manchin who tanked much more substantive climate efforts that existed in earlier iterations of BBB. And let's not forget, despite hailing from one of the poorest states in the union, it was Joe Manchin that killed the very popular child tax credit that had halved child poverty. Now, in order to get him to finally sign on to the Inflation Reduction Act, Senate Leader Chuck Schumer offered Manchin a sweetheart deal, a separate bill that was supposed to pass separately, legislation inclined to make Manchin happy. Now, we knew shockingly little about this giveaway to the West Virginia yacht-dwelling coal baron until yesterday, when the deal was dropped at the end of the workday. But we've now confirmed that the bill is designed to make Manchin and the fossil fuel companies that pay him very, very happy. Now, the latter have explicitly lauded the bill, which stands to fast-track the Mountain Valley Pipeline and speed up the permitting of energy-related projects. Why should you care? Well, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, if completed, would extract an amount of gas that, if burned, would equal 23 new coal plants or 19 million gas-powered cars on the road. It would wipe out much of the lauded climate progress made in the Inflation Reduction Act and edge Americans toward having to pay billions in climate-related repairs over the next decades. Moreover, while some corporate Democrats are embracing the permitting provisions, arguing that they will enable green energy projects to be fast-tracked, according to the lever, legal experts said major questions remain about whether the bill would fix the actual causes of delay in permitting for energy projects, such as federal agency capacity and state and local opposition to renewables. According to reporting from the lever, the primary function of the bill is to speed up fossil fuel projects like the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which Appalachians, by the way, have been protesting on the basis that it threatens their water supply and would displace local communities. The pipeline would stretch 303 miles across the Appalachian Mountains, farmland, and 1,000+ streams, rivers, and wetlands connected to its water table. It's a region prone to mudslides that could threaten the integrity of the pipes themselves. And even under the best of conditions, pipes just leak. They do. Since 1986, pipeline accidents have spilled an average of 76,000 barrels per year. That's 3 million gallons per year. Here's what a local activist had to say last week on Democracy Now!
Currently, the best way to describe the stage of the Mountain Valley Pipeline is segmented all along those 303 miles. For example, the first incomplete stream crossing that they come to is less than 3/4 of a mile from milepost 0 on the project. So what is remaining is some of the most difficult and challenging work and all of the heavy construction work adjacent to, around, under streams, wetlands, rivers, creeks. And Dr. Cavalier has described it well. These are water sources that feed our communities, feed our households, that people use to take care of their livestock. And all of that runs downstream, destroys habitat, and puts people's health and safety at risk.
To his point, these spills not only harm the environment, they can cause heart problems, alter your DNA, cause neurological impairment, and affect the endocrine system. So this is the background for this fight. Joe Manchin basically only agreed to sign on to the Inflation Reduction Act if he got his pet project approved. Damn the environment and damn the health and well-being of the people in his state. But here's the twist. Bernie Sanders says he won't vote for it. And over in the House, Ro Khanna is standing with him. So Manchin and Schumer, the number 1 and 2 recipients of utility cash in Congress, by the way, decided to play hardball by attaching the bill to a continuing resolution, basically a funding bill that's required to keep the government going. If the side deal gets voted down, the government shuts down. They are basically playing a game of chicken with Bernie Sanders, putting him in a position to take the heat for a government shutdown if he stands firm over this side deal. In Manchin's words, I'm not shutting the government down. I'm voting for it. Anyone who votes against it is voting to shut the government down. But let's be honest about what's really happening here. Schumer and Manchin, who accepted $250,000 from the very company that stands to profit from the Mountain Valley Pipeline permitting, are prioritizing a kickback to their donors over the American people they represent. They could have put the bill up for a vote independently without attaching it to the money needed to fund the government, but they've created a hostage situation, hoping that the corporate media will back them in their vilification of independent Senator Bernie Sanders. All that remains to be seen is if Bernie Sanders will, in fact, shoot the hostage. I think he should. Just watch how edgy and irritated Bernie's got Manchin and Schumer in this clip.
Schumer won't budge from a pact he made with Joe Manchin to expedite energy permitting in the upcoming Band-Aid spending bill, called a CR. Are there any circumstances whatsoever that could be taken out of the CR?
I told you.
But you said that for 2 weeks. I'm just getting clear.
I'm saying I'll say it for 2 weeks and 1 day. Next.
Republicans could vote no because the deal secured Manchin support for the climate tax and health package. Progressives oppose it because it cuts against their position on climate change.
I've never seen stranger bedfellows than Bernie Sanders and the extreme liberal left siding up with the Republican leadership. It's like a revenge politics.
A revenge politics. They are pressed. They can't believe that Bernie would actually, for once, stand up to them. And hey, maybe they're right. Maybe he'll ultimately bend the knee. Historically, the only people who ever seem to hold the line and kill legislation like this are corporatists beholden to donors, people like Joe Manchin. Progressives typically fold, claiming that getting something is better than getting nothing at all. It's sort of pathetic, and it's part of why there's such a gap between what most Americans want and what we actually get out of politics. The people who ostensibly went to Congress to speak for us settle for crumbs and then say they're doing it for our benefit. But maybe, just maybe, this time is different. Climate change, after all, presents a threat level that is truly cataclysmic in its nature, and we've run out of time. Incrementalist arguments about how we'll get them on the next round just don't fly anymore. If Bernie holds the line, it won't just force a government shutdown. It may force a much-needed conversation about how corporate parties, swimming in dirty energy money, are acting in the short-term interests of corporations instead of the people who live in their districts. And conservatives better listen up too. Younger Republicans are vulnerable to a leftward shift on key issues like abortion and, yes, climate change. 69% of Republicans under 34 care about climate change a great deal or a fair amount. And over 50% of Republicans aged 34 to 54 feel the same way. Might the threat of adding a gas equivalent of 19 million more cars to the roads start to make climate, along with abortion, an issue that turns younger voters back to the Democratic Party or, even better, to third-party alternatives? We'll find out soon enough. What is Bernie more afraid of? A negative media cycle or the thought of his grandchildren growing up in a world with triple-digit temperatures? What are the corporate Democrats more afraid of? Angering their fossil fuel donors or shutting down the government heading into midterms? Now, it's theoretically possible that Republicans might cross the line to help Democrats pass this bill. But so far, they've said they won't, preferring to push their own more aggressive bill. So in all likelihood, it will come down to Bernie, Tim Kaine, and allied progressives in the House. Will they stand firm, or will they bend the knee?
I love the Game of Thrones graphic there.
I thought you might, Robbie.
That's point one. Point two, who's Tim Kaine?
You don't remember Tim Kaine in the membrane?
Never heard of him. I don't know. It sounds like they should probably just vote to build this pipeline and everything will be fine.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, increasingly what we're seeing is that for corporate Democrats to pass their agenda, because there are a handful of progressives in the House, and obviously Bernie Sanders and one or two others in the Senate who sometimes will hold firm on these issues. To pass a corporate agenda, Democrats do need Republicans. And I think it's revealing to the public who exactly is on their side, and that the so-called big difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, the Democrats saying, oh, Republicans are anti-democracy, Republicans are ruining the world. Well, if you're constantly allying with corporatists in the Republican Party, if you're showing to the public again and again that it's one big corporate party, they're not in it. And it's going to, I think, highlight the reasons why, even though 50 plus, 60, 70, sometimes 80% of Americans agree on basic things like universal health care, common sense gun reform, common sense environmental shifts to green energy, you don't get any of it.
My understanding, though, is specifically, if we're talking about the Manchin pipeline, the one he wants to finish building,
Mountain Valley pipeline,
I don't think it's going to have a very significant negative impact on the environment, if at all, right? Because it's a natural gas pipeline to provide largely Virginia, right, and North Carolina, which burn tons of coal. So it's going to be it's offering them a cleaner energy than the kind that they're using currently. So it's probably going to be close to, I don't know that it'll actually be neutral, but it's probably not quite the hit. I don't think the
problem is that it is actually, environmentalists have been very clear about this. A lot of the rhetoric around clean energy is a real misnomer. The reality is that this is equivalent to opening 23 additional coal plants. That's the emissions equivalent. 23 additional coal plants worth of emissions. And in a world, unless you're complete and total climate change denial, which even most Republicans are not at this point, we all are experiencing raising temperatures. We all saw the triple digit temperatures, particularly in the Southwest over the course of this past summer. We've seen all of these people suffering and dying in other parts of the world, like India, where they have almost every day over the course of a summer in triple digits without the infrastructure to protect them from that kind of a heat. That people don't want that. People don't want to live in that world. And so the language around clean energy has been wielded to try to cover up the extent to which there is no such thing as long as we're still creating these sorts of emissions. And the scientists are pretty clear on this one.
Well, I don't know. I'm seeing a contrary argument. I don't know who's right. I tend to think the smarter way to reduce carbon emissions is some kind of tax on carbon rather than being kind of backward thinking and not like building the infrastructure. Because then we're going to have to just like export this same dirty energy from other places, which just benefits fossil fuel producers in other countries, some of those countries being our enemies.
Well, that's a great point, because what's happening here is the opposite. You're getting kickbacks, in effect, legislation that makes it easier for these people to pursue their projects than other people pursuing other kinds of energy projects and projects more generally across the country. So the question that people should be asking is, why are we basically subsidizing and making it easier
the
to
green
extract
energy people get all sorts of kickbacks. If we're talking about, if you mean subsidies or favorable.
Well, no, I'm talking about a company that stands to profit enormously paying elected representatives in Congress $250,000 so that they can have a specially crafted bill passed that opens the floodgates and overcomes all of the legal obstacles that every other American would have to go through to build this pipeline through the water table of millions of people who could be negatively affected in the area. There's a lot of clamoring about how much we value West Virginians, we value coal miners, we value the white working class, we value Appalachians, we value these people in this part of the world. They're the ones protesting. They're the ones whose kids have to deal with the gross fracking water coming out of their taps that can be lit on fire, and the health consequences that are dramatic. So we'll see how this pans out, and whether or not Bernie holding the line actually highlights the people in this area and what they've been trying to tell us for a really long time.
I just think there's lots of subsidizing and beneficial including for our friend Elon Musk in order to purchase his electric
Maybe your friend, I've never met the man.
Well, thank you very much, Briahna. We'll have more Rising right after this.